peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust is easy. 2 years ago, I did a video on peach pie with frozen peaches. Make sure you check it out. It was amazing. But I wanted to show everyone how to make peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust, not only because not everyone has frozen peaches, but also because, honestly, a pie and a cobbler are two separate things. I'll talk about that a bit more later. I am using two 15-ounce cans of canned peaches in extra light syrup. You can definitely use peaches in heavy syrup or even juice. You will just have to adjust the recipe accordingly, which I'll talk about. As you can see, I drained the peaches and it's not really juice, it's juice and syrup. And here on the stove in this pot, I have 314 grams or 1 1/3 cups juice. And here, the peaches, I have 535 grams or 2 1/4 cups, along with half a cup or 120 grams as I measure of light brown sugar. If you have heavy syrup, peaches in heavy syrup, I would cut that in half. If you have peaches in juice, I would keep the light brown sugar the same and then probably add between 1/4 cup or half a cup of sugar to the peaches. What I'm going to do is I am going to reduce this juice because I think that's way too much. It's going to be kind of watery. And I'm going to turn it up to high. Once it starts to boil, I'm going to turn it down to probably medium and let it reduce. These peaches, I'm going to add to this. It's not really a bowl, a container. I'm going to add my sugar. I'm going to mix. I think that even though these are canned, I still think a little bit of juice is going to come out of the peaches. Whenever you add sugar to fruit, the juices come out. After bringing the syrup to a boil, I turned it down to medium and continued to boil for another 8 minutes. As you can see, the syrup reduced by quite a bit, and the brown sugar drew a lot of extra juices out of the peaches themselves. I then turned off the heat to let the syrup cool down before moving on to my next step in making peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust. As I said before, in my peach pie recipe, I use frozen peaches, a bit of sugar, and just a hint of cinnamon. However, in my opinion, canned peaches do not have nearly as much of peach flavor as fresh or frozen do. So if you use them to make cobbler, they need a bit of help. The key is to give them just enough help to give them help, but not so much help that you wonder whether or not it's a peach cobbler or a spice cobbler. This is what I like to do, and I think it's really good. 1/4 teaspoon cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon nutmeg, 1/8 teaspoon cloves, 1 teaspoon lemon zest, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and 3 tablespoons or 30 grams of cornstarch. Cinnamon and nutmeg are common additions to southern peach cobbler recipes, but the cloves aren't quite as common. If you saw my recipe video for Argentine postraianchi, a peach and polenta and citrus flavored dessert, be sure you watch it. That recipe has both cinnamon and cloves with the peaches, and it worked really well, so I wanted to try it in this. If you don't have fresh lemons, you can use half a teaspoon of extract because 1 teaspoon of extract is equal to 2 teaspoons of zest. A lot of peach cobbler recipes call for a bit of lemon juice. Although I didn't use any this time, in hindsight I think that maybe a little bit would have helped. Between 1 teaspoon and 1 tablespoon. But if you leave it out, it will still be good. When you're making peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust, there are a couple ways you could go about doing the pie crust. You could definitely just do a double crust cobbler. You take the bottom crust, put it in, pour in the peaches, put another crust on top, cut some slits, sprinkle it with sugar, and bake it. But then you could also do dumplings. Dumplings, just like in my blueberry dumpling video or the blackberry dumpling video, not sure which is going to come out first. Little bits of dough are cooked within the fruit. So you take the pie crust, cut it into pieces, and then you mix those pieces in with the peaches, and then either you put the lattice top or a full top crust on the top and bake it. I'm going to show you how to start off with a double crust, and then I'm going to do the dumplings. To put the bottom crust into the dish, lift it up by the wax paper, flip it upside down, and then put it crust down into the dish. Press it down and then cut off the excess dough. Prick it with a fork in 5 to 6 places and then bake it at 350 Fahrenheit for 5 minutes. However, if you are making dumplings like I am, cut out the bottom and then remove. You could blind bake the dough on the sides if you want, but I did not. To make the dumplings, I cut out the bottom, returned it to the wax paper, cut it into strips, and then cut the strips into 3 pieces. In hindsight, maybe I should have par-baked the crust on the side for 5 minutes at 350 to make it a bit crispier, but honestly, I thought it was okay. I then added most of the peaches and syrup to the dish, reserving a bit for later, and added the dumplings one by one. I made sure to push them down into the peaches and syrup so that they didn't all float to the top. I then added the reserved peaches and juices, once again to help make sure that the dumplings were suspended in the juice, not trapped on the bottom or floating on the top. Then, just like with the bottom crust, put on the top crust, making sure to cut off the excess dough that's hanging over the edge. Don't forget to cut some slits into the top crust of your peach cobbler so that the steam from the boiling juices can escape. Although not necessary, a lot of southern cobbler recipes call for sprinkling some sugar on top. I like 1 tablespoon of white sugar and 1 tablespoon of light brown sugar. It adds a nice bit of extra sweetness and crunch. Bake your peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. My cobbler just came out of the oven. It was in at 350 Fahrenheit uncovered for 45 minutes. Nice and golden brown. And look, I baked it on a pizza pan. Make sure you bake your cobblers and pies on some sort of cookie sheet or something in case they start to boil over. This peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust was the best. Although it might not have seemed like a lot, what I used was a perfect amount of spices to give the peaches a little bit of help without masking the peach flavor. In the world of spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, as well as cloves, a little goes a long way. Although I honestly didn't think I would miss it, I think that a little bit of lemon juice would arguably have made this better. Maybe not 1.5 tablespoons, maybe 1 teaspoon, maybe 2, but 1 max. I know that whether or not to add lemon juice to peach cobbler is a point of contention, so I'm not going to force you either way. Speaking of the dumplings, I really like them in this. If you've never had dumplings in cobbler, I highly suggest you give it a try. But if you're feeling a bit hesitant, just go with a pie crust on the top and a pie crust on the bottom. But if you do decide to add a bottom crust, do not add dumplings. That's just too much dough, at least in my opinion. However, as you saw when I cut it, it surprisingly held its shape really well when I sliced it in spite of not having a bottom crust. I think I reduced the syrup just enough and I added the right amount of cornstarch. Honestly, learning how to make peach cobbler with canned peaches and pie crust is super easy. So be sure to try this old-fashioned dessert recipe. Although canned peaches definitely aren't as flavorful as fresh or frozen peaches, you can still make something really delicious out of them. Honestly, I think it's representative of a lot of Southern food as a whole. Born out of necessity, people who don't have very much finding ways to make what they do have taste amazing. So be sure to try this. Thanks for watching. Bye.